Hey everybody, Odin here. So in this video, I'd like to share with you the best settings for getting the most stable frame rate that you can for Quake Champions. And before we jump into this, I want to make a couple of caveats, a few things that I want to mention here. Number one, your technical maximum FPS is determined by your monitor refresh rate. So if you have a 60 Hz monitor or 144, for example, then technically speaking, that's the maximum number of frames that you can see a second. Now, your system may be capable of getting 240 frames per second, but you'll technically, as I'm saying, only see whatever your monitor refresh rate is. So again, if you have a 60 Hz monitor, but you're getting 240 FPS, you're still essentially, quote unquote, seeing only 60 FPS. However, that doesn't mean that you should automatically cap your frames at your refresh rate. We'll talk about this more a little bit later. Now, in Quake, it's not necessarily about getting the most frames possible. This is desirable, of course, but what is more important is getting the most stable, consistent frames possible, regardless of what is happening in the game. This will help you develop flow and feel for the game and ensure you have a stable, smooth input gaming experience no matter what. So input is very important here. So a stable FPS obviously is one part of the equation when it comes to improving at Quake. It goes without saying that hopefully you have a decent monitor, a mouse, and a keyboard, okay? And a nice internet connection also wouldn't hurt. So without any further ado, what are the settings? Okay, well, in all of my testing, in various different resolutions with all the different graphic settings and so on, I have found that in order to have the most responsive, smooth experience, where everything gets turned down to low with a resolution percentage of 75%. It's also important to note that the resolution here is at 1080, even though I have a 1440p monitor. Now, the reason for that is I have a mouse sensitivity of 3.5, and at 1080, it feels responsive and correct and smooth. At 1440, even with the same settings and 75% resolution scale, the mouse starts to feel slow and a little bit sludgy. Okay, but you may ask, Odin, I have a great computer and I can get great frames with higher settings without much trouble. Yeah, so can I. I can run Quake at the highest absolute max settings with a stable 120 FPS, but the game feels slow. Okay, it's hard to explain, but the game simply feels slower. Like the mouse movement is slower. It's not as responsive. Movement is like covered in peanut butter. The game sometimes has micro stutters here and there if action gets really thick, in close quarters areas, which is exactly what we don't want to have in Quake. To be honest, the other thing really about Quake, it's not sitting down and looking at the graphics and going, wow, this is a pretty good looking game. Whoa. I mean, Quake is good looking, okay, but it simply doesn't matter when you're flying around fragging people. You're not sitting there, taking in all the sights, okay? It's about having the least amount of input lag that you can have, so you have the best and smoothest experience that you can have, so you can play. Now, there are some alternative settings. We'll just call these the Rafa settings because these are the settings that he uses. If you have a good enough computer, you can consider putting your lighting on high. This will allow you to see some shadows of players on various maps, so you can see if they're jumping down from somewhere. For example, Ruins, a very popular place, is to be at heavy armor. If someone's dropping down from the ledge, you can actually see the shadow before they land. But again, that's only if you can get a stable, consistent high frame rate and your computer can handle it. I mean, this is really, honestly, only super important if you are going to take dueling extremely seriously and you want to, maybe get the upper hand on an opponent, excuse me. But again, these are the Rafa settings since, he uses them, and if your computer can handle it, it might be something you want to check out. Now, finally, we're going to talk about capping your FPS. So this is where things get tricky, okay? There are many arguments for and against, okay, capping your FPS. And basically, I'm going to come down in the middle. So as I said previously in the video here, it's all about the highest stable FPS that you can get. So what I'd recommend to find this out is open up Quake, allow Quake to have unlimited frames, okay, in the settings. Open the game, play a few matches, and just take note of where your FPS numbers are in general. For example, if you're playing and you see that for the most part you're rendering frames at about around 170 FPS, give or take 10 here or there, I'd probably cap it at, for example, 150. This will essentially give you a stable experience, keeping your input consistent at that consistent 150 rate And at this point, because you're going to have a consistent gaming experience, you're going to get used to how Quake plays and feels at that level, and you'll actually get better because you'll be able to develop some muscle memory and just memory of how the game plays. It's very important in that aspect. So now I can already hear questions like, hey Odin, I have a 60 hertz monitor, so I should just cap it at 58, right? I'd say no, because if you have a computer that can render at over 200 or anything over 60, okay, you'll have a much smoother input experience. And granted, you might have some screen tearing, but your overall input feeling will be better and smoother, even though your monitor is at 60 hertz. So even if you have a 60 hertz monitor and you can render a Quake at 400 FPS, crank it up at 400. You'll feel the difference, okay? And if you don't believe me, run a few tests where you cap at 58, all right? Or if you have a 144 hertz monitor, cap at 142, all right? You'll immediately notice how things feel. You might not feel as responsive, okay? Even with VSync off, all right? Might not feel responsive. The game might just feel like off, okay? Now cap the game at the highest possible stable FPS number and notice the difference, all right? Once you feel it, you'll understand. And games like Quake, all right? Games like Quake factor in the feeling of the game. If you can feel the game, you can get into the flow of the game. That's exactly what you're looking for. That's why a lot of professionals just dump all the settings because they want the maximum amount of frames so they can have the smoothest feeling and the least amount of input lag. Personally, I set my cap at 300 FPS. I usually am rendering like 315, 320, you know, give or take. And on some of the bigger maps, I'll actually render below 300. But personally, I set mine at 300 FPS. I have a 144 hertz monitor, but I can absolutely tell you, I can feel the difference between 142 frame cap and a 300 frame cap. So just to recap, if you want the most amount of frames that your computer can get, you just want to tank all the settings, put them on the lowest possible with a 75% resolution scale and go with that, okay? 1080p resolution, if that would be probably desirable as well. That'll do it for this video. I hope you guys found it helpful, and if so, please hit subscribe, hit like, the bell notification so you don't miss my next video. And let me know in the comments below, you know, what kind of frames are you running in Quake? What's your PC specs? What's your resolution? I'm very curious, you know, what do you guys think of the game, and you know, where's like that sweet spot for you guys? So let me know down in the comments. It'd be pretty cool to see what you guys are gaming at. All right, thanks guys. I'm out of here. Have a good one.